All right, welcome to our slideshow talking about what is religion and what role does it play in culture. And the slides are designed to accompany the book People, Places, and Culture. I am, of course, Miss Gall, and I'll be your host for the lecture. So, one of the big things to talk about when we talk about religion is religion really is a way of showing and kind of what people value. Okay? And in particular, we can look at it and we can see it reflected across the cultural landscape. So in the quote here from the book, they talk about, for example, in Christian areas in general, burial is often the preferred method of dealing with the dead. Right? So we bury them in large, sometimes elaborate cemeteries, right? And if you want to see elaborate, New Orleans, Louisiana would be a great place to go, or any place similarly where there's big mausoleums, right? Hindus, on the other hand, just to give you an idea of something that's completely different, requires cremation of the deceased as a way of releasing the spirit. And so if you go to Hindu communities, whether they're in India or whether they're outside India, you'll see crematoriums, which are kind of the equivalent to a funeral home here in the U.S. So the picture they show you there is from Kenya, which has a reasonably large Hindu population. It's a holdover from colonialism. Taking it back, though, and talk a little bit about what is religion. Right? Religion's really a system of beliefs and practices that try to order life in terms of ultimate priorities. And those ultimate priorities are going to differ from culture to culture. So what's important in one culture might be different than what's important in another culture. We're talking in terms of those like ultimate high level, you gotta listen to this, priorities. Right? And a big piece of that is that religions help set standards for how people should behave. Okay, so for example, if you come from a Christian context, you think of things like the Ten Commandments, right, or the Golden Rule. These are things that come to mind in terms of how one should behave, and that's what a big piece of what religion really is it tries to order the cosmos, kind of explain our role in the cosmos, but it also tries to help order society and explain how, and provide some rules for how we treat each other and how we behave ourselves. So when we look at religion, we talk about how do we see religion, or how do we know religion, how do we identify it? We talk about religion in terms of worship, right? And worship is really basically what you believe and how you go about demonstrating that belief. So for example, if you were Hindu, it might involve going to the temple and performing a certain kind of ritual, or if you were Buddhist, it might involve going to a different type of temple and performing a different type of ritual. You were Jewish, you might go to the synagogue and listen to the Torah. If you're Christian, you might, if you're Catholic, you would go to the church and you'd listen to Mass. If you were Protestant, so a large chunk of the remainder of Christianity, you would go to church and listen to a sermon of some kind, right? These are all examples of worship. Singing hymns, another example of worship. Right? We can see religion manifested in prayer and in the way one addresses the deity or deities that one believes in. Right? And then the other way we see this, and really probably in some ways the way that impacts us the most in terms of our life, is the use of ritual. And rituals are things that take place at regular intervals throughout a life. Often what the purpose of ritual is to mark important points in a life. So examples of these might be birth, marriage, or death, right? The attainment of adulthood. Certainly in some religions, giving a child a name would involve some kind of a ritual, right? Or baptism, joining the community of faith, right? If you're a Christian, call that baptism. That would be an example of a ritual. So just some different ways in which religion manifests itself. So in essence, when we're talking about these things, right, and the way that religion manifests itself in our lives, what we're doing is we're talking about the ways in which we kind of order our lives and separate it out. And that's a big piece of culture and showing what cultures value or don't value. along with this idea of religion, though, we do have to talk a little bit about the fact that not everybody agrees with organized religion, right? So some people are indifferent to organized religion, meaning they don't really care much one way or the other. Or, in other cases, they outright reject organized religious affiliations and the idea of organized religions. Those folks who are kind of indifferent to it, we call those agnostics. The people who outright reject religious affiliations, those folks in general, we call them atheists. Okay? And so these are the folks who literally don't believe in going to church, don't believe in going to God, think religious organizations in general are not a great idea. And one of those things to remember is that this indifference to or this rejection of religious affiliations varies a great deal from country to country, but also varies a great deal within countries. So some areas, for instance, of the U.S. are significantly more indifferent to religion than other areas, right? And these anti-religious ideologies they really contribute to the decline of organized religion. So, for example, in many Western countries, what you see is fewer and fewer people attend church on a regular basis, whether they believe or not. So it's contributed to that decline of religious organizations. It's also important to remember that church membership figures don't accurately reflect active participation. Another way to think about this is, for example, one of my friends likes to refer to herself as being culturally but not necessarily religiously Jewish, meaning that she is ethnically Jewish, but she doesn't go to the temple very often. So would she be listed on the temple rolls? Probably. But that doesn't mean she's an active participant in all of the temple activities. Just means that she goes, probably at certain set times of the year. So we're going to end our little lecture here. We're going to look at that map, and we looked at it in one of the previous lectures. It just kind of shows you how we see religion spread across the world. Right? And this one doesn't take into account the fact that there's an increasing secularism creeping up, particularly in Europe, by the way, is where you see this, and to some degree also in the United States. Right? But when we look at this map, it kind of gives you some idea of the spread of various religions. So, if we're looking at Christianity, what we see is that's mostly in the Western world. So it's we see it in the USA, we see it in Canada, we see it in Europe. Whereas if we look at, say, Islam, we notice where's Islam spread, what we see it spread across much of Southwest Asia, we see it spread across Northern Africa, again, areas that we traditionally associate with Islam. If we're looking at Eastern Orthodox, unsurprisingly, largely in Russia and Eastern Europe. We talk about, say, Hinduism or Buddhism. We're looking at Southeast Asia, by and large. Chinese indigenous religions, along with Chinese versions of Buddhism. Not surprisingly, we see those largely in China, kind of along the coast. Right? Talk about Japanese Buddhism and Shintoism, unsurprisingly, in Japan. So you can kind of see when we look at the map, the spread of religion across the world. So to summarize our lecture today, really what we've been talking about is essentially kind of what defines religion in general. And religion is that set of beliefs that helps us order the cosmos and also order our lives, and we see it manifested through worship, through prayer, and through rituals that mark out major points in a person's life. We talked a little bit about anti-religious feeling and agnosticism and atheism and how those are growing and spreading in certain areas of the world. And we ended by looking at a map of the spread of various types of religions and just looking at really where can we find them if we wanted to look at them. So if you have any questions, by all means, please feel free to bring them to me, and I'd be delighted to answer them during class.